Welcome to episode 40 of the Princeton Podcast, produced by the podcast production team at HG Media, providing audio and video production services here in Princeton since 1999. In this episode, our Princeton Podcast host, Mayor Mark Freda, welcomed J. Robert Hillier, one of the leading and most highly respected architects in the United States, known for having built one of the largest and most successful architectural firms in the world. Robert Hillier, or Bob as he prefers, is the founder of Hillier Architecture and now principal at Studio Hillier here in Princeton. Bob has been on the core faculty of Princeton University's School of Architecture since 1992, where he teaches 2 graduate seminars, and has served on the American Institute of Architects National Fellowship Jury and as chair of the selection committee for the Dean of Princeton's School of Architecture. In addition to describing several of Mr. Hillier's more than 4,000 architectural projects, many of which are here in Princeton, Bob discussed his business collaboration with his late wife, Barbara, and how, in May of 2019, the New Jersey Institute of Technology renamed its College of Architecture the J. Robert and Barbara A. Hillier College of Architecture and Design. Bob Hillier is certainly one of our community's most remarkable Princetonians. So without any further introduction, let's join our host, Mark Freda, and his guest, J. Robert Hillier, for episode 40 of the Princeton Podcast.
Bob, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So Bob, let's talk about you a little bit first. Where did you grow up?
I actually grew up in Princeton. I was born in Canada. We moved to Camden when my father got a job with RCA, and then we moved to the Princeton area, Cranberry actually, and then in 1950 we moved into Princeton, and I've basically been here ever since.
Just a little while.
Yeah.
So Bob, what sparked your interest in architecture?
Funny story. My mother has a head of paper that I'd written in the 6th grade about being an architect, but at that I was going to be a labor relations lawyer, and I got into Princeton, and I came, we had proms, and what we did is convert Dylan Gym into a fantasy land for a night, and the guy who was doing the freshman prom flunked out, and I was a class officer, and I said, okay, I'll pick up the dance decorations, and I did the dance decorations, and my grades started to go down. And so I went to see my counselor, Dr. Challoner, and I told him, I said, I used to be a straight A student, now I'm down in the low B's and C's. And he said, and I said, I'm having so much fun doing the dance decorations and actually some play sets also from McCarter. And he said, go. I said, I'd like to keep doing this kind of thing and yet get my grades back up. He said, go talk to the people in the School of Architecture. And that was it. Huh. So sophomore year, I started the architectural program a year late and went ahead, and then I got a master's degree also from Princeton, full scholarship. And then I was a townie, and it's just been great. It's the greatest profession ever, because every site is different, every client is different, every client's program is different, and that makes it every project different, and that makes it exciting. As opposed to, I did a house once for a guy who did root canal work, and his wife whispered to me, he's having the best time designing this house, and she said, do you know what it's like to rub a little piece of metal in people's teeth for your whole career? And I thought that was just a great description of what, some of the medical profession can be like.
Yeah. So I want to acknowledge, the recent passing of your wife, Barbara, who was extremely involved in your firm. So can you share some reflections on her contributions to your practice?
Her contributions were huge. She came to me right out of school as an interior designer. No experience, but she had a psychology degree, which is important, and she had an art degree, and she was an artist. And so we took her on as an interior designer, And she was our first interior designer, and she knew nothing about doing interior design. But she was very smart and went out and hired a bunch of 60-ish type interior designers who knew how to do projects. And then she went out and started selling her team. And the next thing we knew, the interior design part of the business was becoming huge. And then she said, I want to open an office in Philadelphia. And she went to Philadelphia and built that office up to 90 people doing architecture. All of this while she was not an architect. And Pennsylvania had a very strange law where if you worked for an architect for 10 years, you could then go into a 3-year intern program and you could take the exam. And so she ended up becoming an architect without any architectural training, mainly because she had the experience in the office and she could do the exam. I helped her with the site planning because that wasn't her forte and it was mine. I helped her study for the exam. So she became licensed, but without any credentials. And the second happiest day of her life was when she went to Princeton. We had a non-compete after we merged the firm, and we had a non-compete, and she went back to Princeton School of Architecture and got her master's degree. And she could have been the mother or the grandmother even of all of her classmates. And it was just the happiest day of her life when she got that master's of architecture, because now she had the academic credentials. Right. But she'd already been a licensed architect for 30 years at that point.
What a great story.
And what's interesting about her is she did 2 of the most important projects the firm ever did. One was the Las Colinas Convention Center in Irving, Texas. A spectacular project, which is, rather than being a big flat box like most convention centers, was a stacked set of boxes going 178 feet high into the air of the Texas sky, is the way she described it. And they just loved it, and that project is so successful, it's booked ahead for 7 years. Wow. And the other one she did was for Becton Dickinson. She did an employee services building on a sacred lawn in their corporate campus. And the lawn was so sacred that she proposed to build the building under the lawn. And it's won projects, awards from all over the world. And so she did some really important work. Those are 2 of the most remarkable projects.
Right. Well, it's great to share those with us, Bob.
Great contributions.
Yeah. So, Bob, can you talk to us a little bit about design philosophy? What does that mean, and do you have one?
There's design philosophy and there's a design style. And my philosophy is that the buildings need to be good architecture, and they don't need to all come out of the same mold. There are certain architects you can look at and say, oh, that's an XYZ building, or that's a Q building, or whatever. We believe in programming the client. You program a computer to do a job, you have to program a building to do a job. And the way you do that is you talk to the client and get every detail of what their aspiration is and what their needs are and what their budget is. And our philosophy is to do a building that answers those needs. So it's a design philosophy, but it's heavily driven by what we call the deep dive of programming. So we spend a lot of time at the front end getting to know the client, and then we give the client 3 different concepts, none of which is perfect, but each one of which is different. And the reason we do 3 is if you do 1, it's pass-fail. Let's get another architect. If you do 2, it's just a dumb choice. I like A or I like B. Yeah. With 3, it becomes a real conversation. And in that conversation, you're going deeper into the client's mind to find out what really makes the right building for this client. And that's our philosophy.
That's great. So, the next question, maybe I think you've already answered it a little bit. Is there a process your firm uses in the approach to each project? So I don't know if there's more to add to that, but...
No, it's just that we take those 3 concepts with the client's comments, and that becomes the beginning of the schematic design. And the schematic design is the first hint of what the architecture is going to be. That's the cool thing about it.
Yeah.
I mean, in the case of the Irving Convention Center, it was more expensive to stack a convention center with the longest escalator in the world, like that. But the people at Las Colinas said, we'll just raise the hotel tax to pay for it.
There you go. All right, so let's spend a little more time on this one, which you've alluded to somewhat already. But what sets your designs apart from work by other architects and their firms?
Number one, every building's different.
Yeah.
And there's a whole set of what we call hidden clients on every project. And those are the site, which has its own personality, the culture, the context in which it's going to be built, and, of course, the budget and the economics, and sometimes even the politics. All those things influence a design, and our attitude is you have to bring all of those things into balance. You can't build a wonderful building that's going to go like blazes into marketing and be a huge success if the client can't afford it. Mm. So you've got to balance that goal of being a huge success in marketing with this building, and yet the building has to be affordable to support that business. So that's the kind of thing that we worry about.
Right. So there's a lot of decisions being made between you and the client to get to that, to get to those points.
Exactly. We did the Princeton Public Library. The big hue and cry then was, well, you had a little one library branch working in the shopping center while we were building the new library. But before that, they were saying, why don't you just build a new library out of town and we'll keep this one, the old library, which wasn't working very well, as a branch. Yeah. Well, we had to convince the whole town, talk about politics, that keeping it downtown was the right thing. When we were hired, they had 750 patrons a day. And when we finished that building, they were up to 2,500 a day. That's the difference. And libraries are no longer warehouses for books. They are, in fact, community media centers.
Right. And
if you go into the library today, you'll find people at every one of those computers, because a lot of them can't afford to have a computer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how well the design of the library has worked. But I do remember the debate in town between the shopping center and downtown. Oh, my gosh. Hey, Bob, so how do you think architecture impacts everybody's daily life?
You live in it.
Yeah.
Every place you go, you're in architecture. And it should be as delightful an experience to walk into any building, to walk into any room as you can make it. And that's one of our goals, is to have it be exciting. You'd be amazed the difference a high ceiling makes in a space. We're used to living in 8-foot high ceilings, yeah, but everybody's getting taller. But when you walk into a room with a 10-foot ceiling, it feels different. And when you walk into a room with a 12-foot ceiling, it feels even more different. Yeah. And those little things are at work on you all the time.
Right. So I would suggest that there's probably a lot of architectural things isn't the right word, but architectural style things that you input into any design that people may not even notice, but there's a feeling when you're in a space. Maybe you don't know why it feels good.
Yeah.
But a good architect probably understands all of that.
Well, it's, the color of the space, the orientation of the room. Does the sunlight ever get into it?
Yeah.
Those kind of things. There are studies that show that apartments that never get sunlight, the people are more depressed.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. So it's impacting your daily life all the time.
All the time. So I hear a rumor that you're publishing a new monograph, and I believe the title is Hillier Selected Works. Could you let us know about this?
Well, I've always been against doing books, but we did a book 25 years ago. It was about 200 pages, and it was all of our work. Now, after 57 years in practice, we have over 4,000 projects that we've done. That's why it's called selected works. And what we've done is basically kept to the 20 projects done in the last 25 years. One thing that we did, which a lot of people don't know about, is we created the idea of a corporate campus. And we did that with the Beneficial Project in Gladstone PPAC. And that became a model for so many corporate headquarters because it had the flexibility for the business to grow or shrink, and for everybody to still feel comfortable in it. And it was a set of small buildings connected rather than one gigantic, as one of my clients called it, a corporate aircraft carrier, which AT&T was building at the time. And so those, as a result of that, we've done over 80 corporate headquarters around the world. And people don't really know that, but we build a huge practice in just doing corporate work.
Right. So I guess the whole idea of having the several smaller buildings, if you do need to scale back, then it's easy to say.
That's
it's
right.
not so obvious that we gave up that space to somebody else.
Yeah.
Or,
So anyway, to answer your question, with 4,000 projects behind us, we decided to select a few of the best and put them in there.
right. So when is this coming out?
It's coming out in October 23rd. We're having a reunion. We have over 1,500 alumni, former employees, and we're inviting them all back for a reunion at Hillier College of Architecture at NJIT, and for a great big party. And we're going to hand out the book to all of them when they come back.
Very nice. So, Bob, I think the current firm you have is actually your second firm.
That's correct.
Yeah. So what are the differences between today's firm and the firm that you had before?
The firm I had before, we had 500 employees, and we were doing projects all over the world and all over the country. We have projects in 27 states and 34 foreign countries. And I didn't know half of those projects. I knew who the clients were, and in most cases I knew the clients, but I wasn't really doing architecture. And so we sold the firm and merged with a firm in Scotland. We were the third largest firm in the country, and then we became the third largest architectural firm in the world with the merger with RMJM. And Barbara and I finished up Princeton Hospital, and she finished up the Irving Convention Center, and then we left. And we had a 2-year non-compete. And at that point, I realized I was missing doing architecture.
Sure.
And so I said, okay, I'm going to do architecture where I can really work with the clients and really design for the clients the way I did when I first started out. I started out all by myself. And so that's the most rewarding part of being an architect, is helping people solve these space problems. And so I wanted to get back to that. Barbara wanted to get back to it. And so we started Studio Hillier as kind of the rebirth of the Hillier group.
Right. Yeah. It's a great story. So, Bob, is there an ideal client?
Yes, there's an ideal client. We're still looking for them. The ideal client is one who really is interested in the architecture, and one that has a reasonable budget but does have a budget. We've had some really difficult clients where they said, "Oh, I can pay for anything," and then the bills started to come in, and all of a sudden they couldn't pay for everything, and those became really unfortunate client experiences. We have a track record of never having a client sue us. Whenever we've had a mistake, and it's called errors and omissions, and we have insurance for it. But whenever we've had a mistake, we've jumped right in and solved the problem with the client, and they never had to call a lawyer. So we're very, very, very proud of that. And from a practical side, that's one of the things about dealing with clients is you never. It's a mea culpa. If you've done something wrong, the sooner you own up to it, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, it's just
And we find when we've done that, clients have been extremely gracious, and they've even helped pick up the bill for the damage.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think in so many areas of life, if something goes wrong, just face it right away. Just say, let's just figure it out.
Yeah, get rid of it.
Just get rid of it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about who to blame. Let's just how do we get by it. All right, you had mentioned NJIT earlier, and also I think it would be nice to explain how the NJIT's College of Architecture and Design was renamed. You mentioned the name, but why don't you tell us a little bit about that, how it happened, and your involvement there?
I designed the very first School of Architecture for NJIT 50 years ago. And it was a gymnasium on top of one of their old classroom buildings. It's right in the middle of Newark. And they said, turn this into an architecture school. And then the school took off and it grew. And they called me back about 5 years later and said, well, we want to move part of it downstairs. And so we renovated it. And then 15 years after that, they said, we now want to build a new building. And they hired us to do that. And so we did that. And they had given my father, who developed the first operating electron microscope in the world, they'd given him an honorary degree. And the next thing I knew, they were giving me an honorary degree. and so then it came time, they wanted the school was having some difficulties, and they wanted the school to kind of get a new life. And so they approached me about the possibility of a gift. And so Barbara and I talked about it, and we gave them a substantial gift. It's an annuity type of thing where we still get an income, but they have the gift. And they, instead of calling it the School of Architecture, they named it the College of Architecture and Design. And what's interesting is the design part is computer design, which is now becoming a very important course. And it's also interior design and graphic design and interior design. So you have all of those design skills on top of the architectural. Since they renamed the school, and what was wonderful is they named it after me and Barbara. And it's called the J. Robert and Barbara A. Hillier College of Architecture and Design. It's a real tongue twister. But anyway, since they renamed it in the last 4 years, the enrollment has gone up from 600 to almost 1,000 now. And they're now talking about expanding the building because the school's gotten so successful. The beauty of NJIT is that it is a school where it's the number one school where your income is such a major improvement once you're 30 years old. In other words, these are kids that are coming out of Newark or out of New Jersey, not with a lot of money. It is a state college, and so the tuitions aren't huge, and a lot of them are day students. But once they go out with a degree, they make more money for somebody their age than anybody else around them, and that's a wonderful way. And we just felt that was so important, and so we're excited about it. And I can tell you this: the students come. I teach at Princeton. I teach in the architecture school there, and I can tell you that the students coming out of NJIT are awfully good at putting buildings together.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Yeah, because it's got more of an engineering bent. It's a different school than Princeton. The missions are different, but in fact, they are really good architects, and I have 4 of them working for me.
Oh, there
No.
you go.
Yeah.
That's a good testament.
Yeah.
Bob, do you have a favorite type of project to work on?
It's funny you ask that. My favorite project is a custom home.
Really?
And I love doing custom homes. And I didn't mention this, but even when we had the big firm and there was stuff going on, that I would look at it and say, yeah, that design looks okay. And that was about the extent of my design part of every year I would still design one custom home. And I have 98 custom homes in Princeton, believe it or not. And they were just a thrill to do, and I did them all on the weekends and evenings when it didn't interrupt my business. And then I had a good architect working for me doing all the technical stuff.
Sure.
But I was in constant contact with the clients. I just found that was really exciting. And some of them have become lifetime friends.
Well, I guess if if they are your friends, they must have liked the house.
Yeah.
So do you have a top 5 most proud of project list?
That's a hard one, but I can tell you them because they were really important. One was the beneficial headquarters in Gladstone Peapack. We did that for Finn Casperson. And it was a thrill because it was the first campus. And he said, 58% of my employees are women. And I want a building that women are going to feel comfortable in. Really important. And he said he didn't want the corporate aircraft carrier. He was the guy that referred to that. And so we did that campus, and it just became a hallmark for corporate campuses. The second one is the corporate headquarters that we did for GlaxoSmithKline, which is in London. It's a 1 million square foot building, almost 900,000, and it's modeled after a London street, same proportion, 5 stories high, 50 feet wide, and on the first floor are barber shops, travel agents, a library, 4 restaurants, fast food and elegant food, a bank, an insurance agent, all of those things that employees need. And the HR president vice president called me about 2 months after they'd moved in. They had just merged. We did the building for SmithKline Beecham, and then they merged with Glaxo. And he said, Bob, you've got to know something. That atrium street at the bottom of this building has become something that is just melted the two companies together. And he said, where most mergers you hear we, they.
Yeah.
He said, we don't hear that around here because everybody knows everybody now because they're mixing it up. Yeah. 15,000 employees in that one building. So, and then the Sprint headquarters in Rolling Park, Kansas, is the biggest. It's 5 million square feet of office space in the campus mode, 15 buildings and 15 parking garages. But the campus itself is walkable. It has its own zip code. And then the next one I'm most proud of is Bryant University. It was Tupperware. It was Tupper's farm, and he gave it to Bryant as a donation. And Brown University bought the Bryant campus, and we had 22 months in which to design and get built an entire campus for, at that point, 3,000 students. And it was a thrill to do that. That was our first really big job. I'd only been in practice 7 years, and that was a big one. And I think the other favorite ones are the campus at Lawrenceville. We've done more buildings there than any architect. And the campus at Petty, where we've been working for 40 years. And Finn Casperson introduced us introduced us to Petty, actually. And so that's how, those are my 5 favorite projects.
There you go. Quite a career so far, Bob.
Yeah, so far.
So far. It's still going.
It is still going. Now my favorite project is what we're doing on Witherspoon Street.
Right. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
It's what we're doing is Princeton has become so expensive that anybody making $50,000 a year can't live here.
Yeah.
And so we're doing housing for the missing middle, as we call it. The people who are essential to having a good town, like librarians, teachers, firemen, policemen. We want to house them. And the way to do it is to increase the density and do it with smaller apartments. Because when you're downtown and you can walk every place, and Witherspoon Street is beautiful because it's nicely scaled as a residential community. It's 5-minute walkable to the library, to all the churches, to the campus, to the YMCA, and the only thing that it isn't walkable to is Princeton Shopping Center. But there are people that do that walk too, or bike it.
Yeah.
And we're providing 70 new apartments on Witherspoon Street. And I say 70, we actually have 36 already, but we're taking them apart and putting them back together in a different format. And then we're adding another 35 new ones. And they're all smaller, but they are beautiful apartments with lots of daylight and lots of amenities. And of course, the biggest amenity is being in Princeton.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing, and we're doing the same kind of project in New Hope. Also, and the challenge here is that we're in a historic district, and in New Hope we're working on a historic site, and putting in 29 condominiums. But in Pennsylvania, you don't have the affordable housing requirement, et cetera. I should mention that 20% or 14 of the 70 new apartments are affordable.
Right.
So 56 market units and 14 affordables.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear you're helping to address the missing middle housing problem, because that's a huge problem in
It
Princeton.
is a big problem. And I think because of you and the council, that issue is getting addressed.
Yeah. Trying to.
In big time.
Yeah.
And speaking of projects I'm proud of, one of them is Copperwood, which was the first really major apartment project in Princeton since Palmer Square.
Yeah.
And it's been a great success. We built it, developed it, and that's another thing I didn't mention, is that half of our practice now is just designing our own projects that we're the developer on, such as Witherspoon Street and such as the project in New Hope. And we were the developers, builders, et cetera, of Copperwood. And we managed it for 10 years, and we just sold it.
So, Bob, I want to thank you very much for finding time to join us today. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for the 40th episode of the Princeton Podcast, produced by the podcast production team at HG Media, providing audio and video production services here in Princeton since 1999. If you enjoyed this episode of the Princeton Podcast, please share it with your friends. Visit our website at princetonpodcast.com and be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts.